the Interstellar Academy floated quietly in the void, a massive structure of metal and glass designed to teach beings from dozens of worlds how to control power, think strategically, and survive in a galaxy where peace was fragile and danger was constant. From the outside, it looked peaceful, almost inviting, with its curved towers and shimmering observation windows. But inside, tension moved quietly through the halls, unnoticed by most instructors, yet felt by anyone who walked the corridors with care. Every species had its own rules, its own strengths, its own weaknesses, and every student carried the pride or fear of their homeworld with them. Among the thousands of students, one figure moved almost unnoticed. He was a human, quiet and still, with dark hair that fell lightly across his forehead, and eyes that seemed to watch everything without being noticed. He wore the academy uniform like everyone else, but there was something different about the way he carried himself. He did not speak unless necessary, did not argue, and did not draw attention. He was small compared to many of the students from stronger worlds. His frame lean but not weak, and his expression calm to the point of unreadable. Many thought him strange. Some called him timid. Few dared guess the truth. He came from Earth, a world marked in the Academy records as a death world. The term Deathworld carried weight, but it was not understood fully by the other students. Many imagined humans as savage, almost animalistic, capable of extremes of violence and endurance that made other species nervous. Others thought the reputation exaggerated. After all, this human had never fought anyone, never raised his voice, never demonstrated any particular skill. He seemed ordinary. And in the academy, ordinary was often ignored, even in a galaxy full of wonders. But there was more to him than anyone realized. On Earth, he had grown up where survival was constant, where danger came in subtle and unexpected ways. He had learned to move quietly, watch carefully, and react with precision. He had learned patience in a world that punished mistakes harshly. And though he did not boast, the core of a survivor burned within him. He carried it lightly, but it was there. For now, though, he was invisible. He walked the halls silently, observing the other students as they practiced drills, trained with weapons, or argued in their own languages. Some species were loud, physical, and aggressive. Others were graceful and patient. The human noted all of it without comment, learning patterns and weaknesses as easily as he learned the names of corridors. He had no friends nor enemies, at least not openly. His life in the academy was measured in small movements, in careful choices of when to speak or act, and in silent observation. Some students, however, were beginning to notice him. A group from a warrior race with thick, armored skin and towering frames had begun whispering about the quiet human. They laughed quietly in corners, mocking his silence, his calm demeanor, and the way he walked without drawing attention. "Look at him," one said, a hint of disgust in his voice. "He comes from a so-called death world, and yet he is weak. He does nothing." "He is nothing." Another laughed, a low, rough sound. "Perhaps he thinks the stories of Earth are real. Perhaps he thinks he is dangerous, but he is just a mouse in a cage." The human heard none of it. He walked the corridor, hands behind his back, eyes calm and alert. He knew they were watching, testing him. And he did not respond. To respond would give them power. He had learned that silence was a shield as strong as any weapon. The whispers grew bolder. The students from the warrior race began to follow him, lightly at first, then more openly. They blocked corners, shifted in his path, and made small threats meant to provoke a reaction. "Do you even know how to fight?" one sneered, stepping close to him in the hallway. The human paused, measured his distance, then continued walking, his eyes fixed straight ahead. He said nothing. He did not flinch. And that lack of reaction unnerved them more than words or anger could. Other students watched quietly, some curious, some fearful. They knew stories of humans from death worlds, of how a single human could survive circumstances that would kill many other species. But the human before them seemed harmless, almost weak. And yet, something in his stillness made them hesitate. Something in the way he moved, the way he observed, suggested he was not to be underestimated. But none dared confront him yet. It was safer to watch from a distance, to whisper rumors, to test the limits of his patience. The quiet one continued his routine, attending lectures, practicing drills, and observing others. The instructors, busy with their duties and trusting the academy's rules to maintain order, did not notice the growing tension. They assumed all students could manage themselves. They assumed most of the humans were ordinary. They assumed the quiet one was just shy, but the human did not assume. He calculated. He observed patterns, weaknesses, and opportunities. Every glance, every gesture, every whispered word was noted. He learned how others moved, how they reacted to pressure, and how they tried to assert dominance. It was not fear he felt. It was awareness. Awareness was survival. And on a Deathworld, one misstep could end your life. The warrior students became bolder over the weeks. They mocked him openly now, blocking him in hallways, throwing minor projectiles, and whispering insults loud enough for others to hear. They laughed when he ignored them, assuming he was afraid. The human did not fight. He did not retaliate. He simply moved with calm, controlled grace, slipping past attacks without effort, watching and learning all the while. The other students began to notice the pattern. They began to whisper among themselves, saying, "There is something about him. He does not fight, yet he is not afraid. Something in him is different." The day of the planned attack came without warning. The warrior students had grown arrogant. They had studied the human, testing him with small attacks and mockery, and they had convinced themselves he was weak, a quiet target. They waited for a moment when he would be alone, away from the crowded lecture halls and corridors, in a narrow passage where no one could interfere. Their plan was simple: corner him, humiliate him, and prove that Deathworlders were not invincible. The human entered the corridor carrying nothing but his small bag, his steps measured and quiet. He sensed something was off, but he did not panic. Panic was a reaction for the unprepared. He moved forward, noticing subtle changes in the shadows, the echoes of footsteps, the slight shifts in the air that indicated others were hiding. He knew he was being watched. He knew what was coming. And still, he walked as if nothing mattered, as if he were unaware. The warrior students sprang their trap. They blocked the corridor, surrounding him with smiles that did not reach their eyes. "Finally," one said, "the weak human shows himself. Let's see what you can do." They lunged, expecting flinches, screams, or pleading. But the human did not react in the way they imagined. He did not panic. He did not scream. He did not attack wildly. He observed, calculated, and waited for the exact moment. The first contact shocked them. They expected resistance, but not like this. The human moved with fluid precision, dodging, sidestepping, and redirecting energy in ways that were impossible for someone of his size. One attacker fell forward after hitting a wall. Another twisted uncomfortably as he was pushed off balance, and a third barely avoided a carefully timed block. No one had expected the calm, controlled force that the human carried. Every movement was efficient, precise, and deadly in its restraint. Other students in nearby corridors began to notice the commotion. Some came closer, curious, while others froze in fear. The human did not shout or rage. He did not enjoy the fight. He simply acted, using the skills ingrained from years on Earth, where mistakes could mean death. Each attacker learned quickly that their strength alone was meaningless against patience, awareness, and precise timing. By the time the first wave of attacks had passed, several of the would-be aggressors were injured, embarrassed, and terrified. The human stood among them, breathing steadily, as if he had only taken a short walk. The silence afterward was intense. The other students stared, unable to process what they had witnessed. The warrior students were humiliated and shaken, not just by the defeat, but by the calmness of their opponent. He had not even seemed angry. He had not even seemed human in the way they expected. It was a quiet, terrifying power, one that spoke not of rage, but of control, patience, and survival instinct. By the time the instructors arrived, alerted by the noise and commotion, the human was already calm, standing silently among the fallen aggressors. The corridor smelled of dust, sweat, and the faint tang of fear. The instructors did not understand what they saw at first. They saw the aftermath, not the precision or the survival instinct. They assumed the fight had escalated quickly, but the human had already returned himself to a state of near normalcy, as if nothing had happened. The human's eyes scanned the faces of the other students, calm, unshaken. He did not gloat. He did not speak. He simply stood and observed, waiting for the situation to settle. Around him, whispers grew. Students began to realize that the quiet human was not weak. He was not ordinary. He was something else entirely. A survivor, a being who understood danger in ways none of them could comprehend. And though the instructors would later analyze the event, the human had already proven the unspoken truth. In the galaxy, assumptions could be deadly, and Deathworlders were never to be underestimated. The aftermath of the first confrontation left a strange silence in the academy corridor. The warrior students lay on the floor, nursing bruises and pride, while the human stood quietly, his breathing steady, his face calm. Around them, other students whispered, glancing nervously at the scene. None dared approach him directly, yet everyone felt the presence of something far greater than size, strength, or reputation. The quiet human had shown them a hint of what living on a death world truly meant. The injured students struggled to their feet, their faces pale. They had expected a weak opponent, someone who would flinch, scream, or beg. They had underestimated him entirely. Now their confidence was gone, replaced by fear and disbelief. One of them, the tallest of the group, spat on the floor, trying to regain a shred of dignity. "This is not over," he said, his voice trembling. We were just testing him. Just testing." The human did not respond. He simply adjusted the strap of his bag, his eyes scanning the hallway as though nothing had happened. Every movement was precise, deliberate, and calm. Even in the presence of anger and threat, he maintained control. The other students began to understand that this calmness was not weakness. It was a weapon that they could neither read nor predict. As the warrior students limped away, some muttering threats under their breath, the human continued his routine. He attended lectures, practiced drills, and moved through the academy with the same quiet confidence. But something had changed. The whispers followed him now, not just from the warrior students, but from many others. They spoke of Earth, of the Deathworld humans, and of the quiet one who had endured attacks without fear. Rumors spread he was more than human, more than ordinary, more dangerous than anyone had guessed. The human did not mind the whispers. He had learned long ago that attention was a trap. In his world, predators watched constantly. Survival required observation, patience, and control. To react emotionally was to invite danger. He had learned to respond only when necessary, with precise and measured action. That instinct had served him well here, and now it had taught the other students a lesson they would not forget. But not everyone was convinced. The warrior students, humiliated and angry, began to plan. They could not accept being bested by someone they had considered weak. Pride, fear, and the desire for dominance fueled their thoughts. They whispered in corners, scheming, plotting, and watching. They would strike again. The human was quiet, yes, but they believed that no human, no matter how trained, could stand against coordinated attack indefinitely. They were wrong. The next confrontation came in the Academy's training facility, A large room filled with various combat simulators, weapons, and obstacles. The human had been practicing quietly, moving through drills with precision, when the warrior students arrived. They were more numerous this time, coordinated and confident. They cornered him near the central platform, blocking every exit. "Now we will see who is really strong," one of them said, his voice low and threatening. They lunged together, expecting the human to flinch or fight blindly. But he did neither. He stepped lightly to the side, letting their combined momentum carry them past him. One attacker collided with a wall, another stumbled over an obstacle, and the rest found themselves unbalanced, confused by the human's calm and controlled movements. The human's strategy was simple but devastating. Observe, avoid unnecessary conflict, and use precision to disable each attacker without wasting energy or provoking chaos. He did not attack recklessly. He did not show anger. Each motion was calculated, a mixture of speed, leverage, and anticipation. The warrior students had trained to dominate weaker opponents through brute force. They had not trained for a Deathworld human who had mastered survival to the point of instinct. The fight escalated quickly. The human moved faster than most could follow, striking only when necessary, redirecting force, using balance, and exploiting the environment. Every time an attacker gained ground, he adjusted calmly, never panicking, never hesitating. His small hands were quick and accurate, his movements economical, yet powerful. Within moments, several attackers lay on the ground again, bruised and shaken. One screamed as he fell, the sound echoing through the training hall. But the human did not raise his voice. He only observed, calculating the next move. Other students began to gather, watching in awe. No one had expected such skill from someone so quiet, so small, so calm. Some whispered, "He is a human from a Deathworld. That explains it." Others said nothing, too shocked to speak. The lesson was clear. Underestimating a Deathworld human was dangerous. The warrior students realized their arrogance had led them into a trap. They tried to coordinate, to strike together to overwhelm him with numbers, but the human adapted. He moved unpredictably, yet precisely, predicting their attacks and avoiding them with minimal effort. One by one they fell, tripped, or collided with walls, each misstep a result of his awareness and control. By the end of the skirmish, all of them were on the ground again, injured and humiliated. Finally, the human stepped back. His breathing remained calm. He had not fought for dominance, not for pride, not for victory. He had fought to survive, to protect himself, without unnecessary cruelty. The warrior students stared at him, panting and bruised, realizing that they had been bested not by anger or rage, but by controlled skill, discipline, and instinct. The silence that followed was heavy. The human adjusted his bag and began walking toward the exit of the training hall, his movements unhurried, as if nothing had happened. The crowd of students parted instinctively. They watched him go, understanding at last that this human was different. He was quiet, but his silence carried power. His calm carried strength. His presence carried a warning. Never assume what a Deathworld human was capable of. Word spread quickly throughout the academy. Instructors began reviewing security footage and witness reports. The human had not violated any academy rules. He had defended himself precisely and efficiently, using the skills and instincts that were natural to him. No one could argue that he had acted recklessly. In fact, some instructors were impressed, noting the exceptional control, discipline, and awareness he had demonstrated. Yet, while most students were impressed, the warrior group was not. Their pride had been shattered. They could not admit defeat, and they could not forget the humiliation. They whispered in corners, plotting revenge. They spoke of numbers, timing, and planning attacks when the human was least prepared. They could not imagine that someone so quiet could be so lethal without even trying, and they did not realize that every plan they made, every calculation, would be met by the human's patience and awareness. For the human, the aftermath was calm. He did not seek revenge, nor did he feel anger. He had done what was necessary to survive. He had learned more about his peers, about their weaknesses, about their arrogance. Every gesture, every movement, every strategy they employed was noted and remembered. This was not cruelty, it was survival instinct. This was the way of his people, and it had been honed through generations of challenge on a world where mistakes were fatal. Days passed, and life in the academy slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. Other students watched the human differently now, with a mixture of respect, caution, and curiosity. Even those who had previously dismissed him as weak began to realize that he was far more than he seemed. And though he remained quiet, he was no longer invisible. His presence commanded attention without words. His silence spoke volumes, and it warned everyone who might underestimate him in the future. The warrior students, meanwhile, continued to plot, driven by a mixture of pride and fear. They watched him from afar, observing, trying to understand how someone could survive attacks so effortlessly. They did not know that the human had already learned their strategies, had already predicted their movements, and had already prepared mentally for any future conflict. Their arrogance blinded them to the reality of a Deathworld human. One evening, as the sun-like lights of the academy dimmed, the human sat alone in the observation hall, looking out at the stars. He did not smile. He did not relax. He was thinking, observing, planning, as he always did. He understood the challenges ahead, understood the arrogance of other species, and understood that survival required more than strength or skill. It required patience, awareness, and the ability to remain calm under pressure. He was ready. The academy had tested him, other students had tested him, and the warrior students had attacked him. He had endured, survived, and demonstrated that Earth humans were not to be underestimated. And though the instructors had arrived too late to prevent the conflict, they would learn from it. The human had already made his point. On a Deathworld, weakness was not an option, and every challenge was an opportunity to prove oneself without unnecessary violence. As the stars glittered outside the observation window, the quiet human prepared himself for what would come next. The warrior students would not give up easily. But he had faced worse. He had survived Earth. He had mastered control, patience, and precision. And in the academy, he would continue to show that humans were not defined by size, speed, or appearance, but by the ability to endure, survive, and remain calm when all others lost control. In the quiet of the night, a message was clear to anyone paying attention. Underestimate the quiet. Deathworld human, at your own risk. The alarm blared through the academy, cutting sharply through the quiet hum of evening. The human had sensed it before the first voice called, but he remained calm. He knew the warrior students had not given up. Pride and fear were a dangerous combination, and they had grown desperate to redeem themselves. This time, the danger was not only their numbers, but their planning. They were determined to corner him when the instructors were away, when help would not arrive in time. The human moved quietly through the corridors, aware of shadows, the subtle echoes of footsteps, and the faint vibration of metal beneath his boots. He had learned early that anticipation was survival. Every corner, every doorway, every stairway was part of the environment, and he counted it in his mind as he moved. The warrior students were clever, but their arrogance would betray them. They believed that because he was silent, he would be predictable. They did not understand what patience meant to someone from a Deathworld. Elsewhere in the academy, instructors were scrambling. Messages had flooded in. Fights, injuries, and chaos spreading in isolated training zones. The academy was a massive structure, and no single instructor could respond instantly. They rushed through corridors, their boots echoing on metal floors, their voices calling commands that were already too late. One instructor, older and more experienced than most, clenched his jaw as he ran toward the scene. He had heard stories about the human student, of course. He had heard rumors of Earth, and its Deathworlders, he did not expect the scale of what he was about to witness. Back in the training hall, the human had already arrived. The room was narrow, filled with equipment, walls lined with sensors, and obstacles scattered for combat training. The warrior students moved quickly, trying to block exits, planning a trap that relied on speed and coordination.
"This time, we make him pay," one hissed under his breath. "We show him he is weak."
"We show everyone that Earth stories are lies." The human paused, his eyes sweeping the room. He noticed the alignment of the walls, the placement of each obstacle, the angle of the lighting. His mind calculated distances, timing, and likely movements of each attacker. He did not rush. He did not panic. Survival on a Deathworld had taught him that patience and observation were far more powerful than raw strength. The attack began immediately. The first warrior lunged, aiming for a strike that would disarm the human quickly, but the human sidestepped, shifting his weight just enough to use the attacker's momentum against him. He did not strike out with anger or force. He simply redirected, guiding the warrior into a nearby support beam. The collision made a loud clang echoing through the hall, but the human did not flinch. The other attackers moved together, trying to overwhelm him with numbers. Their coordination was good, but they underestimated one thing: the human's perception of space and motion. He predicted their movements almost instinctively, adjusting position, stepping lightly, and using the environment to his advantage. One attacker tripped over a low obstacle, another collided with the wall after miscalculating distance, and yet another found himself momentarily pinned under a heavy training device. The human remained calm, breathing slowly, eyes scanning every shift in balance and in tension. He did not attack unnecessarily. Each movement was precise, measured, and designed to neutralize threat with minimal effort. The warrior students had expected chaos, confusion, screams. They had expected resistance fueled by rage. Instead, they encountered control, awareness, and patience, a combination they could not understand, let alone overcome. Meanwhile, the instructors were arriving. They entered the building 2 minutes too late, their presence immediately noticed by the combatants. They could see the chaos, the fallen students, the human moving calmly among them. The scene froze many of the onlookers in place. What had begun as a brawl now looked like a carefully orchestrated defense. Several of the warrior students tried to continue attacking, but the humans' movements were too fast, too deliberate. The lead instructor's voice boomed, demanding the fight stop. "Cease immediately! This is unacceptable!" He rushed forward, but it was clear that he had arrived too late to prevent the conflict. He could only observe the aftermath of the skill, control, and instinct displayed by the human. The room was silent, except for the heavy breathing of the exhausted attackers and the steady calm of the human. Medical sensors and emergency systems automatically scanned the participants. The warrior students were bruised, battered, and exhausted. Some had minor fractures, sprains, and muscle injuries. The human had no visible injuries beyond a light scratch on his arm, and his vital signs indicated minimal stress. The data shocked the instructors. Every movement, every strike, every reaction was executed with controlled energy. The human had demonstrated skill, precision, and awareness far beyond what the academy considered normal. The instructors gathered, reviewing security footage and eyewitness accounts. What they saw stunned them. The human had not attacked recklessly. He had not acted out of anger or pride. Every strike, every step, every dodge was executed with deliberate calculation. The instructors murmured among themselves, realizing that their assumptions about humans were incomplete. The Deathworld student had demonstrated something extraordinary: restraint, awareness, and an instinct for survival honed to perfection. The warrior students, meanwhile, were struggling to recover. Their pride had been shattered. They could not understand how a single human could have survived, much less controlled, a coordinated attack from multiple attackers. Their fear of the human grew, mixed with a bitter humiliation. They whispered among themselves, trying to make sense of what had happened. but there was no answer in arrogance. Only the lesson that the quiet student from Earth could not be underestimated. The lead instructor approached the human cautiously.
"The student," he said, voice calm but firm, "explain yourself."
"Why did you not call for help? Why did you not retreat?" The human looked at him without anger or fear. His eyes were steady. "I acted in self-defense," he said simply. "I observed, I avoided unnecessary harm, and I protected myself. That is all." The instructors considered this, reviewing every angle, every detail. They could not find fault. The human had followed rules, defended himself, and demonstrated skills that far exceeded expectations. And yet they also understood the danger. If he had lost control, the consequences would have been catastrophic. The calm efficiency of a Deathworld human was not a toy. It was not a game. It was a warning. The human returned quietly to his quarters afterward, his routine unbroken. He did not celebrate. He did not seek recognition. He knew the challenge had been met, and that was enough. His mind, already alert and aware, began to note the reactions of other students, the weaknesses in their approach, and the potential for future threats. Survival required constant awareness. Pride and revenge could be lethal in a single misstep. The Academy, meanwhile, began to change its perception of humans. Instructors who had previously dismissed them as ordinary or unpredictable began to study them carefully. Students whispered in corridors, trying to understand what made humans capable of surviving situations that would overwhelm other species. The quiet human became a subject of observation, not ridicule. His calmness, his patience, and his precise skill set were now recognized as extraordinary traits that reflected the harsh world from which he had come. The warrior students continued to plot revenge, their pride wounded and their fear growing. They did not understand the human's mind. They did not understand that patience, control, and observation were not weaknesses, but strengths honed to survive the most extreme conditions. Each plot they considered was anticipated by the human. He did not need to act preemptively. He only needed to remain aware. Days passed. The Academy returned to normal routine, but the lesson had not been forgotten. Students avoided unnecessary conflicts with him. They whispered about Earth, about Deathworlders, and about the quiet student who had stood calm in the face of multiple attackers. Even instructors began to recommend observation and study of humans as a species, noting that their survival instincts, self-discipline, and ability to remain calm under extreme stress were unparalleled. Yet, for the human, nothing had changed. He continued his studies, his training, and his observations. He did not seek fame, nor did he enjoy recognition, nor he had survived. He had defended himself. That was enough. The Academy, the students, the warrior group, all of them were lessons in patience, strategy, and observation. He would continue to learn, to grow, and to be ready for the next challenge, whenever it might come. By the end of the week, the instructors convened a council to discuss the events. They debated the human's abilities, his restraint, and his skill. Some were in awe. Some were wary. All agreed on one point. The quiet Deathworld human had demonstrated survival instincts and control that could not be taught in any classroom. He had shown that raw strength was meaningless without awareness, discipline, and calm precision. And in the quiet of his quarters, the human reflected on the events. He did not feel pride. He did not feel fear. He only felt awareness. The warrior students might strike again. Others might underestimate him. But he was prepared. Survival required constant vigilance, constant observation, and the ability to act when necessary, without emotion clouding judgment. That was the way of his people. That was the way of Earth. That was the way of a Deathworld human in a galaxy that had yet to fully understand him. The human's eyes glimmered faintly as he looked out at the stars. Beyond the Academy, the galaxy stretched endlessly, full of unknown challenges, dangers, and opportunities, he would face them as he had always faced everything, with calm, control, and awareness. And the galaxy would learn, sooner or later, that a quiet human from a Deathworld was never to be underestimated. The Academy had not been quiet for long. Word of the Deathworld human's calm, precise skill had spread like fire. Students whispered his name in corridors, some with awe, others with fear. Instructors began reviewing protocols, ensuring that no one underestimated him again. Even the warrior students who had attacked him before were now cautious, hesitant to challenge him openly. They had learned painfully that arrogance against a human from Earth could be dangerous, even deadly. The human continued his daily routine as if nothing had happened. He attended lectures, practiced drills, and moved through the hallways with his usual quiet calm. But beneath that calmness, his mind was always active. He observed everyone, calculated their likely moves, and prepared for the next challenge. On a Deathworld, survival depended on awareness, anticipation, and discipline. The Academy had given him practice, but his instincts came from far harsher lessons on his home planet. It was a bright morning when the warrior students finally decided to act. They had spent days planning, whispering, and scheming in corners. Their pride demanded it. Their fear of humiliation demanded it. They cornered him in a narrow corridor, attempting a coordinated strike they hoped would overwhelm him. Numbers were their advantage. Confidence fueled their attack. They believed that the human would falter under combined pressure. They were wrong. The human had anticipated the possibility. He moved lightly into the corridor, aware of the angles, aware of the timing. As the first attacker lunged, he stepped aside with perfect balance, letting the attack pass harmlessly. Another tried to strike from above, but the human twisted, using the attacker's momentum to guide him into a wall. The third attempted to pin him from behind, only to stumble over a small obstacle the human had noted earlier. Every move was precise, efficient, and controlled. The fight escalated quickly, yet no chaos or panic erupted. The human did not attack in anger. He did not strike recklessly. Each motion was calculated, aimed at neutralizing the attackers without causing unnecessary harm. The warrior students were unprepared for this type of fight. Their strength and size were irrelevant against patience, awareness, and perfect timing. The humans' movements flowed effortlessly, turning their attacks into disadvantages against themselves. Nearby students watched in awe. Some whispered, others gasped, and a few simply stared, unable to comprehend what they were seeing. The human did not shout, did not show emotion, and yet his presence dominated the room. He was not merely surviving, he was controlling the situation. The warrior students realized their plan had failed before it had truly begun. Their confidence crumbled under the steady calm of someone they had thought weak. The lead warrior, desperate, tried to coordinate a final attack. He shouted instructions, gesturing wildly, hoping to overwhelm the human, but the human's eyes were already on him. He moved with anticipation, using the attacker's own energy against him. A single redirection, a subtle step, and the attacker found himself unbalanced, falling heavily to the floor. His companions paused, unsure of how to proceed. The human remained calm, observing, ready, and in control. The commotion drew the attention of the instructors. They arrived moments too late to prevent the fight, but in time to witness the extraordinary skill of the human. They saw how he moved, how he avoided strikes, and how he neutralized each attacker with efficiency and minimal effort. They realized immediately that the human's reputation as Deathworld survivors was not a myth. It was fact. This student, quiet and unassuming, embodied the survival instincts of his species perfectly. Medical sensors automatically scanned the participants. The warrior students were bruised, exhausted, and shaken. The human had no serious injuries. His vital signs were steady, his breathing calm. The instructors conferred quietly, noting the efficiency and restraint demonstrated. They could not fault the human. He had acted in self-defense. He had shown remarkable control. He had survived an attack that should have overwhelmed him. They realized something important. Raw strength alone did not define a survivor. Awareness, discipline, and calm under pressure could surpass brute force every time. The warrior students, realizing their defeat, were humiliated. Their pride was shattered. Some tried to speak, but their voices faltered. Fear mixed with shame. They had underestimated someone they considered weak, and the consequences had been humiliating. Whispers spread among the crowd of onlookers. This was not merely skill. This was something far beyond ordinary expectation. This was instinct, honed to perfection. This was human. The lead instructor approached the human, speaking quietly but firmly. Student, your control and awareness are remarkable. You have followed academy rules, protected yourself, and shown skills far beyond what we expect. Explain yourself. The human looked at him calmly. I acted to protect myself, he said simply. I observed, I avoided unnecessary harm, and I remained in control.
That is all.
His voice was steady, lacking pride or fear. It was the voice of someone who had survived countless dangers before, someone who understood what it meant to endure. The instructors nodded, recognizing the truth in his words. They could not argue. The human had demonstrated something extraordinary. He had survived an orchestrated attack with calm precision, restraint, and perfect awareness. His actions were not the result of arrogance or anger. They were the product of instinct, training, and experience, qualities born on a Deathworld where survival required constant vigilance and perfect timing. The academy began to change its perception of humans. Students and instructors alike realized that underestimating a human was dangerous. The quiet human had shown them that calm control and awareness could surpass raw strength. The warrior students who had attacked him were disciplined, but more importantly, they were forced to recognize the danger of pride and assumption. They had learned a hard lesson. Deathworld humans were survivors, and survival was a skill far more refined than mere aggression. The human, for his part, did not seek recognition. He returned quietly to his studies, attending lectures and training sessions as if nothing had happened, but his awareness remained sharp. He continued to observe, to note the weaknesses and strengths of his peers, and to prepare for future challenges. Survival was a constant process, and he knew that one misstep could be deadly. His calm, controlled demeanor was not just habit. It was survival, instinct. Word of his abilities spread throughout the academy. Students approached him cautiously, some with respect, others with curiosity. They asked questions, watched him practice, and learned from his movements. The human responded quietly, offering guidance only when necessary, never boasting, never seeking praise. His presence alone was enough to command attention and caution. He had become a living example of what humans from Deathworlds were capable of. Adaptable, disciplined, and calm under pressure. The warrior students, now cautious and wary, could no longer challenge him openly. Their pride remained, but it was tempered by fear and respect. They whispered among themselves, trying to understand how someone so quiet could possess such skill. They did not realize that the human had already studied their movements, anticipated their strategies, and prepared for any future confrontation. They had underestimated him once. They would not make that mistake again. Days turned into weeks. The academy settled into routine, but the memory of the human skill lingered. Students and instructors alike continued to discuss the events, analyzing footage, and considering the implications. The human had demonstrated that survival was not about size, strength, or aggression alone. It was about patience, observation, and discipline. It was about control, calm, and the ability to act precisely when necessary. The human continued his quiet routine, but he remained vigilant. He knew that challenges would come again, that some would test him out of curiosity, pride, or fear. He understood the arrogance of other species and the danger of assumptions. He had survived attacks, observed weaknesses, and maintained control. That was enough to ensure he would endure whatever came next. Instructors began to use the events as teaching examples. They spoke to students about the importance of observation, patience, and restraint. Patience. They spoke about the danger of underestimating others, regardless of size, race, or origin. The quiet human from Earth had become a symbol, a lesson, and a living example of survival instincts honed to perfection. The warrior students, once arrogant, now moved cautiously around him. They respected his skill, feared his awareness, and understood that he could survive where others might fail. They whispered stories to other students, speaking of his calm efficiency and the way he had turned attacks against him into his advantage. He had not sought victory. He had not sought revenge. He had simply survived. And in doing so, he had proven the truth about his species. Humans from Deathworlds were not to be underestimated. The human in the quiet of his quarters reflected on the events. He did not feel pride or satisfaction. He only felt awareness, the understanding that survival required constant vigilance. The academy, the students, the warrior students, all of them were part of a larger lesson in patience, control, and instinct. He had survived their tests, and he would continue to do so. That was enough. As he looked out at the stars beyond the academy walls, the human understood a simple truth. The galaxy underestimated humans because it did not understand the harshness of their home worlds. It did not understand the discipline, patience, and awareness required to survive. But now, through quiet observation and precise action, he had shown the truth. The galaxy would learn, slowly, that a quiet human from a death world could survive anything. And in the corridors of the academy, students would no longer see weakness in silence, nor vulnerability in calm. They would see patience, discipline, and strength, the true marks of a survivor. The human had not just defended himself. He had reshaped perceptions. He had shown that humanity, honed by struggle and danger, could endure, adapt, and command respect without raising a hand unnecessarily. And so, life at the academy continued. The human remained quiet, observant, and vigilant. The warrior students learned caution. The instructors learned respect, and every student who encountered him learned a subtle but vital lesson. Never underestimate what you do not understand, and never mistake calm for weakness. The quiet Deathworld human had survived. He had endured. And he had proven that sometimes survival itself was the greatest power a being could possess. The days after the Academy's confrontation passed quietly on the surface, but beneath the calm, a storm of observation and awareness brewed. The human moved through the hallways as he always had, calm, silent, and attentive. But now, the whispers of his actions had reached beyond immediate corridors. Students from distant wings spoke of him with awe. Instructors referenced him as a lesson in patience and discipline, and even those who had never encountered him began to look for signs of the quiet Deathworlder. Despite the attention, the human did not change. He did not seek recognition or fear. He had no interest in titles or praise. His life was simple. Observe, learn, practice, and survive. That was enough. The Academy had become another environment to understand, another world to analyze. Each student, each instructor, each corner of a hall presented patterns. Patterns meant predictability. Predictability meant survival. The warrior students who had attacked him were still smarting from their defeat. Pride gnawed at them, but they dared not act recklessly again. They had learned the hard way that strength without awareness was useless against a Deathworld human. Instead, they watched him from a distance, studying his movements, trying to understand how someone so quiet could react to multiple attacks with perfect control. They whispered to each other, forming plans they would never dare execute. They had been bested not by anger or cunning, but by calm, observation, and instinct. Life in the Academy returned to routine, yet the balance had shifted. The human had become a symbol, though he never asked to be one. Other students began to approach him carefully, sometimes seeking guidance, sometimes simply observing. He would answer questions when necessary, but never boasted. He demonstrated technique without show, precision without pride. The mere fact of his calm presence taught more than lectures ever could. One afternoon, the human found himself alone in the Academy's observation deck. The view stretched across the void of space, glittering with distant stars and planets. From here, he could see the galaxy in miniature, a reminder of the vastness beyond the Academy's walls. He stood quietly, hands behind his back, considering what had happened and what was to come. Every action he had taken, every move he had made had been carefully measured. He had defended himself without excess, neutralized threats without cruelty, and preserved his own safety. It was then that an instructor approached him, quietly. This one had not been present for the earlier events but had studied the recordings. "Student," the instructor began, "you have demonstrated skills that are extraordinary. Not just physical, but mental. You observe, predict, and control with a clarity we have never seen." The human did not turn immediately. He remained calm, his eyes on the distant stars. "I act as I must," he said softly.
"I do not seek to impress. I do not seek to dominate."
The instructor nodded. "And yet, what you have done has taught more than any lecture. Students are learning that strength alone is meaningless without awareness. You have reshaped perceptions." The human turned then, his eyes steady and unflinching. "Perceptions are irrelevant. Actions matter. Observation matters. Control matters. That is survival. That is what is important." Word of his calm efficiency and deadly precision traveled beyond the Academy. Other worlds began to take note of the human student, studying Earth and its Deathworlders with renewed interest. Messages from distant administrators praised his restraint, his skill, and his ability to act with minimal waste. He had become a model, not by choice, but by consequence. Despite the recognition, the human did not let his attention waver. He continued to study, to practice, and to observe. The galaxy was vast and dangerous, and while the Academy had been a controlled environment, the challenges outside would not be. He studied patterns in the behavior of his peers, noting tendencies that could become threats. He observed the responses of instructors, noting which actions drew attention and which did not. Every detail mattered. Every observation was another piece in the puzzle of survival. The warrior students, meanwhile, had changed. Their arrogance had been replaced by caution. They no longer underestimated him. They spoke of him quietly in corners, studying him from afar, whispering of his discipline and control. Some even tried to learn from him, though never openly. They understood that the human's calm was not weakness. It was mastery. In the weeks that followed, the human's abilities became legendary among the Academy's students. He was the quiet observer who could survive attacks from multiple opponents. He was the example of restraint and precision. He was the living reminder that assumptions were dangerous, that arrogance could be deadly, and that calm could be more powerful than strength. One evening, the human returned to the observation deck, reflecting on what he had learned. He thought of his homeworld, Earth, and the countless lessons it had taught him. Every challenge he had faced there had prepared him for this. Every instinct, every reflex, every moment of discipline had been honed over years of survival. The Academy had only confirmed what he already knew. Humanity, shaped by struggle, was resilient beyond measure. He heard movement behind him and turned slightly. One of the warrior students approached, hesitating. There was no malice in his stance, only caution. I wanted to understand," the student said quietly. "How you moved, how you reacted. It is incredible. I thought we were strong. I thought we could dominate you. We were wrong." The human regarded him calmly. Understanding comes from observation. not pride.
You must learn to control your reactions. You must learn to see clearly.
Only then will you survive. The student nodded slowly, a new respect forming. I will try, he said. I cannot promise I will always succeed, but I will learn. The human gave nothing more, only a slight nod. He turned back to the stars, his mind already moving to new observations, new calculations, and new lessons. Survival required constant attention. It required learning, patience, and discipline. It required awareness of oneself and others, and the ability to act decisively when necessary. As days turned into weeks, the academy continued its routines, but nothing was quite the same. The quiet human had changed the balance, shifted perceptions, and taught lessons that no lecture or drill could replicate. Students no longer underestimated the seemingly weak. They watched, they learned, and they adapted. Even instructors adjusted their expectations, recognizing that raw strength was secondary to awareness and discipline. One afternoon, as the academy trained for a simulated combat exercise, the human moved through the training room with his usual calm. Others watched, noting how he adjusted his steps, predicted the movements of dummies, and practiced precision strikes without aggression. The room was filled with students from various worlds, all observing, all learning.
No one dared to challenge him openly.
Even the most confident warriors now approached him cautiously, recognizing that the quiet one from Earth was not merely capable, he was exceptional. The human's reputation had grown far beyond simple survival. He had become a symbol of what humanity could achieve when shaped by adversity. Other students began to emulate his discipline, his observation, and his patience. They began to understand that survival was not about anger, strength, or dominance. It was about awareness, control, and the ability to act decisively when necessary. The warrior students who had once sought to challenge him now avoided direct confrontation. They studied him, learned from him, and adapted their behavior. Pride remained, but it was tempered by respect. They understood that the human had demonstrated something beyond mere skill, a mastery of self, an instinct honed through years of challenge, and the ability to survive against all odds. Even the instructors came to observe him carefully. They studied his movements, his responses, and his decisions. They realized that the quiet human from Earth had taught more than any lesson, more than any drill. He had shown the academy that survival was a combination of awareness, discipline, and calm, and that these traits could surpass strength, speed, and aggression in effectiveness. As the sun-like lights of the academy dimmed, the human returned to the observation deck once again. He stood silently, looking out at the stars, reflecting on the lessons learned and the challenges that awaited. The galaxy was vast, full of dangers, unknown species, and unpredictable events. But he was ready. He had survived the academy, survived multiple attacks, and proven that humanity shaped by Deathworlds could endure anything. And in the quiet of the night, the human understood something vital. He did not need recognition. He did not need glory. And he did not need fear. Survival, awareness, and control were enough. The galaxy would learn, slowly but surely, that the quiet human from a Deathworld was not to be underestimated. And so he waited, silently, calmly, watching, learning, and preparing. For in the universe, challenges were endless, and survival required constant vigilance. But he was ready. Always ready. The quiet Deathworld human had endured attacks, reshaped perceptions, and taught lessons without pride or anger. He had proven that calm, patience, and awareness could surpass brute strength, and he would continue to endure, adapt, and survive, long after the whispers of his name had spread across the academy, and perhaps even beyond. The galaxy would never forget the quiet human from Earth.